Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of my deck crash courses, where I very briefly go over a deck, how I build them, which units I choose, sometimes which I don't, what you might or might not want to use, without going in very deep, to keep this just very short in case you just want to roughly know how to build a deck or just want a starting point and then experiment with yourself. I don't know. I asked whether you like it. A lot of people said yes, they would be interested, so without wasting too much more of your time, let's get into it. And today we're gonna take a look at Landjut. First, logistics. First, infantry squad. Infantry CV is always good. I like them in the links for the speed. Fuchs Fufu, you get 5 of them due to the availability bonus, which later on also plays a role, so that's nice. So you have 8. In team games, you can also go for the Centurion, Leopard 2 or Leopard 1, of course. Supply Drug and Fob. Supply Drug, I prefer the 20-point ones. The 30-point one is also fine. I would never go for helicopters, and I just hate the 10-point ones. Jeeps, I generally do not recommend, but you know, with CVs, it's not really that huge of a deal. In 1 vs 1s, it can play a big role. In team games, usually not so much. Infantry, there's 2 more or less mandatory, I would say, or things that I always choose, to put it that way. This is a Panzergrenz and a Marder 2. Panzergrenz 9 in the Marder 2. Marder 2 in Landjut, or like any German coalitions, really plays a big role because it's essentially deals with anything that isn't a tank most of the time. And since your sub 100 point, sub 80 point tanks aren't very good, that fills that role. Dragoner, one of the best spam infantries. Make sure to take them in the 5-point transports with 2 front armor. And next, you can all either take Lift Garden or Lift Garden 85. Again, note the better 5-pointer. Panzergrenz 9 in the 5-pointer for some cheap, high AP anti-tank weaponry. Fallschirmjäger 90 if you want something real that is strong. Me personally, I take a card of Panzergrenz 90 in the 5-pointer as well as Ilstot to Gruppe 85. Keep in mind you only get 2 of these transports, so I generally would not recommend taking more than 2 Danish squads in the infantry tab, because otherwise you only get this basic 5-pointer, and that makes them usually a good bit weaker, although, yeah. And then of course, usually you would take a Milan 2 in the Fuchs Milan or Milan 1 in the 5-pointer. Both are very fine. Personally, in 1 vs 1, I actually prefer to take the Fliegerfaust 2 in the Fuchs. And what you can also do, especially due to the availability bonus, making this actually somewhat worthwhile, is take only 3 infantry cards and then take both Fliegerfaust and a Milan squad or anti-tank ATGM squad. In team games, it's much more easy to play without manpads, but in 1 vs 1s, it's at least worth considering. If you play with only 3 cards of infantry, I would definitely not skip on the Dragoner, which I would not do anyways, but that's a very card efficient unit as well. Support. Automatic is obviously a must. It's incredibly strong. All-around unit, kills planes, kills helicopters, kills ground units. Down-vetted, you don't need a veterancy, and 5 is you know, you don't want less than 5. Again, availability bonus of Landjut means you get 5 instead of 4, which is great. Next, I personally like the Gepard A1 to have something more affordable. That is still all-around. Gepard also works, but of course significantly less accuracy and no stabilizer can sometimes make this a bit awkward, but it's still very fine. Gepard A2 also works, but at this point it's already so close price-wise to the automatic that you might as well buy the automatic. Personally, I skip over the Rolands in this deck because the automatic is already incredibly strong versus planes, because it has significantly more range versus airplanes than other specs. Other specs get reduced range versus airplanes, the automatic doesn't. Still, if you want, of course, you can still run the Rolands, they're all fine. Maybe the Roland 3 if you want something wheeled. For artillery, of course, you always want a mortar. Even if you don't like smoking your own super heavies, or you think you're not able to do so, they're still very useful. Smoking of any enemy ATGM squads, helping your infantry in fights with direct fire support. Lars 2. Lars 1 is also fine, but I've come back to Lars 2 due to the aim time. Is good. On its own, if you use only a single one, use it at very close range, not max range. The Mars can be fine, though I would not recommend in 1 vs 1s. I run 5 support cards, and I actually run a second card of the HS30 and use a bunch of them just very aggressively in 3 or even 4 stacks for fire support for my infantry when they fight in forests especially. Can be very strong. You can also run the M110 or again, this one is mostly for team games. A card of 50-point M109s, keep spam 4 or 5 of them, and they can really keep a forest pinned down and just panicked and whatnot. Takes a time to get rolling, which is why I would not recommend this in 1 versus 1s. Alternatively, you can also run the Eon's Eyehawk if you have issues with Seed, especially since the stack is very vulnerable to it. Once again, more of a team game pick in my opinion, because yeah, it's not very consistent. Tank tab, very simple. You have like 2 actually good tanks. That's a 2A5 and a 2A4. Then you either want the Leopard 2 or the 2A1. This is a very common 1 versus 1 setup. I wouldn't bother with the Centurions. I wouldn't really bother with the Leopard 1 line. The 104 is fine, but the Marder 2 basically fills the same role. Currently I'm trying out the base Leopard 2. 2A1 is also fine, probably better. Some people like the Kyler. I would recommend not using it. Dies to one-shot to any 26 AP missile, which is most notably some stuff like Peace Shrines, Boombar, Milan F3, RBS 56, and a couple more. So this is what my tank tab looks like roughly. Recon tab, obviously want the Tiger, especially since you're running a fob. I would recommend downwetting it so you can get more value out of them. Jaguar 90 are incredibly strong. Recon Infantry, one of the best in the game. Don't have the best transports, but they're still very good. I run both up and down, the 90s in both transports. Jaguar base can also be fine, but the extra range on the cargo stuff is amazing. And the other Recon squads usually not that great. Fanspeer aren't honestly too bad, especially in team games, can be very, very useful. Though you don't necessarily have the artillery to support them on all maps, because on long and big maps, the M110 can't reach everything. And then I usually run 2 cards of the base M41A1. It's just incredibly strong. It's 10 points, has good optics, has stealth, good fire support, good flank defense, good base defense. It's so good. Ignore the autonomy, it's still very, very strong. The looks can be fine. You can run a card of looks, maybe for sneaking around, for wheeled openers to protect your Fuchses or whatnot. Leopard 1 can also be okay. You can also run a card of Spaderner or even BGS in a 5-pointer or something like that if you want something cheap. All very fine. Or as well, Scout Defenders, also of course a very, very good unit. Vehicles, there's not really much to look out for if you have the space, which I usually don't. You can run either this, which is essentially a Recon type will cut, by the way, also very good, just without the optics or the stealth. Marder VTS1 is some people still like it. It's auto-loaded, but it's not a big deal. Jaguar 2 can be kind of nice because it has medium optics, basically a killer of IFVs, just has to reload for 5 seconds between each individual missile. If you want an anti-GM carrier, I would recommend the Lara Tau 2. Wheeled, cheap, Tau 2, strong, yeah. Helicopters, basically 3 good choices, the both Fennecs and the bow. The bow to basically help with your non-radar helicopter killer capabilities, if you will. It's not particularly fast, but it's cheap, it's consistent. You know, sure it dies fast, but it isn't meant to go up against enemy helicopters that have missiles of their own. So yeah, I actually run them, although you probably won't really use them all too much, but I think they can still be useful to have. Fennec Tattoo is very strong. It's incredibly underestimated. 6 HP, very fast, very small, more survivable than you might think. Tattoos are of course very strong. No, also a good option, although you will not necessarily use them as often as a Tiger, but just because you have a Tiger doesn't mean there's no role for it. It's in the end more than or less than half as much price-wise. And a Fennec 20mm to use on flanks and openers if you don't have a Tiger or something, to check flanks. And if the enemy doesn't have anything to deal with it, the autocannon actually deals a lot of damage, you know, deals with MTVs and such because they only have a basic MG and so on. So in these scenarios they are actually very, very useful. Very underrated unit as well. Just keep in mind it has no turret, so if it wants to fire it has to turn the whole helicopters. Air, of course, KWS, one of the strongest, probably if not the strongest ASF in the game, depending on how you look at it. Finnish MiG-29, of course, is very much a contender. But when it comes to card efficiency, there's not, I don't think anything that is quite as close to the KWS other than the Finnish MiG-29. But again, that depends on how you look at it. So definitely take that up with it, of course. Next, of course, at least one card of Peace Shrines, especially in 1 versus 1s. Incredibly strong, cheap, fast, can kill helos in a pinch. yeah, very good. And with the base veterancy of Hardened, also a lot more consistent than it used to be. Now there's some other options. You can run ECR, especially in team games, definitely worth considering. In 1v1s, a bit tough to use or to put in, because with this setup at least I have only 4 slots for planes, so I usually do not run the ECR in 1v1 decks. I run the MLU upfitted. For one, because, you know, being upfitted on elite means the AIM-120s actually are very deadly, and I run it as backup ASF, or if I have to buy it, or if I bought it already, then I also have an ASF on standby if I don't have a KWS already. So it is basically one of the most multi-role planes in the game, because, you know, stuff like IDS isn't really a multi-role, let's be real. 4 ATGMs means it, especially on elite, is incredibly deadly against enemy super heavies as well. Or can kill 2 medium tanks in one run. But the other thing is also that if you have that out, the enemy can't just send an ASF, because you are very deadly against other planes as well, of course. And yeah, if there's a big plane battle coming up, I like to use this in a second row behind my KWSs, because having only 1 per card and being a very strong AT weapon as well, I don't want to lose it very early. You can also run a second guard of peace runs. I, in my 4th plane slot, run the block 5, very strong cluster plane, very versatile, and just having the option to also use a cluster plane means that even the forests aren't quite 100% secure for your opponent. And if they use a lot of smoke or something, and the super heavies maybe on 1 or 2 HP, then you can use this to, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but with a high probability, finish off the enemy tank. F100D can also be worth it if you like rocket planes. You can even split the rockets if you're good at microing. WDNS can be an okay bomber. CF-104 can be a good pure helo hunter if you want that, something affordable. The rest of the planes are not really that noteworthy. Of course, this is also very good ASF. If you wanted 2 ASF card setup and don't, you know, want to include the MLU with that, then this is your second ASF card, also very strong. But of course, KWS should be in your air type no matter what. And I think that is about it. I hope I didn't talk too fast. I hope you understood what I was saying. You understood what I was saying, I should say. And yeah, let's see. How long was this? 12 minutes? Good. I wanted to keep this under 15 minutes. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. I hope this was useful. I will not really leave a deck code in the description. I guess I could leave the deck code of my deck in the description, because, you know, this is just more or less a rough idea. And yeah, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.